What if the perfect man your daughter married was secretly planning to destroy you? Today's story comes from one of our viewers, and it is a chilling reminder to trust no one. At her own daughter's wedding, a 72-year-old widow uncovered her new son-in-law's vicious plot to put her in a nursing home and steal everything she owned. He made one fatal mistake. He thought she was helpless. He didn't know his prey was secretly sitting on a $35 million fortune. Your story has power too. If you have an incredible story of strength or survival, share it with us. Email us at womenstoriess@gmail.com. And now, get ready for the story of how a widow became a hunter. They seated me at table 12, tucked behind a floral arrangement of white lilies so enormous it could have hidden a small car. It was as if I were some embarrassing relative they hoped would simply vanish into the centerpiece. I offered a sweet, knowing smile, deciding then and there that my charming new son-in-law had no idea what kind of storm he was about to walk into. The morning had started with such surprising optimism. I'd chosen my outfit with the precision of a chess master, a silk dress in ash gray, a color that whispered, "harmless widow," paired with my grandmother's pearls for just enough dignity to avoid looking pitiful. My silver hair was styled in a neat bun at my usual salon down the street. Nothing too fancy, just respectable enough for the wedding of my only daughter, Emma. "You look acceptable, Mom," Emma said when I arrived, her attention already stolen by whatever crisis the wedding coordinator was currently having. Acceptable. The word hung in the air like a participation trophy in human form. I watched my daughter glide across the room in our family's heirloom wedding gown, the one beautiful thing we'd managed to keep through the years. She was radiant, glowing with that new bride energy that makes everyone temporarily forget their own problems. I saw a younger version of myself in her, but with an innocence I had lost long ago. As the guests filtered in, the social hierarchy of the event became crystal clear. Marcus's parents, the Thorns, swept in like visiting royalty. His mother, Patricia Thorne, was dripping in enough diamonds from a brand I'd rather not name to blind anyone within a 10-meter radius. She worked the room with surgical precision, air kissing the important people while somehow managing to look straight through me as if I were a piece of invisible furniture. Her husband, Mr. Thorne Sr., a well-known tycoon, followed in her wake, offering practiced, empty smiles to potential business partners. I made my way to my designated exile, which offered a spectacular view of absolutely nothing except hibiscus and baby's breath. From my horticultural prison, I could watch the festivities unfold in a large mirror across the room. There I was, Sylvia Beaumont, a retired librarian. 72 years of accumulated wisdom, tucked away like last week's newspaper. The ceremony itself was beautiful, I'll grant them that. Emma looked like a princess from a fairy tale, and Marcus cleaned up nicely in his expensive suit. But it was during the cocktail hour that I noticed something fascinating about my new son-in-law. He had different smiles, like an actor changing masks for each role. There was the megawatt charm smile, reserved for the obviously wealthy guests. Then there was the practiced, polite smile for the useful ones. And finally, complete indifference for anyone who looked like they might ask for favors instead of offering opportunities. He was a hunter, and this grand ballroom was his jungle. He moved through the crowd with an efficient grace, his eyes constantly scanning, assessing the value of every person he greeted. I watched him laugh with a senator, clasp the shoulder of a bank president, and then barely acknowledge an old friend of our family who had come to wish them well. Every interaction was a transaction. I nursed a glass of water, feeling the familiar, quiet power of being underestimated. People saw a silver-haired woman in a simple dress and assumed my life was equally simple. They assumed my mind had softened with age. It was an assumption that had served me well over the years. Robert, my late husband, had always appreciated that about me. "You see everything, Sylvia," he used to say, "because nobody ever thinks you're looking." He was right. And right now, I was looking very, very closely at the man my daughter had just married. "Mrs. Beaumont?" A smooth voice purred beside me. I turned to find Marcus himself, armed with that dazzling high-wattage smile, the one I suspected he reserved for people he was about to manipulate. "Isn't this just magical?" he said, gesturing at the reception, as if he had personally arranged the sunset outside the window. "You must be absolutely bursting with pride." "Oh, I'm practically vibrating with maternal joy," I replied, my voice sweeter than artificial sweetener. "Though I must say, the view from here is quite educational. I can observe everything without being disturbed." He either missed the acid in my tone or, like a seasoned politician, chose to ignore it. "I was hoping we could spend some quality time together soon. Really get to know each other properly, Mrs. Beaumont." "How refreshing," I said, taking a slow sip of water. "Most people manage that before marrying into the family. But I do admire your commitment to doing things in reverse chronological order." That earned me a microscopic pause in his smile. Barely a flicker, but I caught it like a hawk spotting its prey. "I was thinking dinner this week," he pressed on. "Just the two of us. I have some fascinating ideas about family collaboration." Family collaboration. How deliciously ominous. "Well, I do love a good mystery dinner," I said. "Does Thursday work for your busy schedule?" "Perfect. I know a place downtown, very private. Excellent for meaningful conversations." Meaningful conversations about what? I wondered. My thrilling stamp collection? My weekly bridge club scandals? "I can hardly contain my excitement," I said, fanning myself with my napkin like a southern belle having the vapors. As he glided away to charm more promising prospects, I caught my reflection in that mirror again. A silver-haired woman in understated clothes, sitting alone behind a forest of flowers. Exactly the image I had been cultivating for the past 2 years. Marcus Thorne had made his first move. Now it was my turn to plan mine. The wedding aftermath lasted exactly 48 hours before the real show began. Emma called me daily, each conversation a breathless symphony of marital bliss, and how wonderfully Marcus was treating her. Her voice chirped through the phone, a happy but hollow tune. "He's so thoughtful, Mom," she said during one call. "Always thinking ahead about our future and our financial security." Financial security. The phrase hung in our conversations like smoke before a fire. My poor, dear daughter. She saw a devoted husband. I saw an accountant taking inventory. "How lovely, darling," I replied, my voice calm as I watered my orchids. A husband should definitely think about money constantly, especially other people's money. There was a slight pause on the line. "What do you mean by that, Mom?" "Nothing, dear," I said smoothly. "Just that financial planning is so romantic. Very few young couples are that forward-thinking." "I know," she said, the relief in her voice palpable as she completely missed my sarcasm. "He really is a visionary." I didn't want to burst her bubble of happiness, at least, not yet. I needed to see how this play would unfold. The following days passed like a dental appointment you couldn't reschedule. I spent my time engaged in thrilling widow activities, dusting Robert's old books, deadheading the roses in the garden, and wondering what my charming new son-in-law wanted to discuss over what would undoubtedly be an overpriced bottle of wine. I walked through the garden Robert and I had built together. He was a simple man, but there was a sharp intellect behind his quiet demeanor. "Sylvia," he used to say, "watch more than you speak. People reveal their true nature in the small things." And Marcus, well, he had so many small things worth watching. Thursday evening arrived with all the enthusiasm of a tax audit. I began to prepare for my role, the modest widow. I selected a simple black dress, classic in its design, suggesting respectability without wealth. I paired it with my mother's pearl earrings and Robert's watch. It had stopped running the day he passed away, but it still looked dignified from a distance. I looked at myself in the mirror, a woman who had seen 7 decades pass, with eyes that held stories no one could read, her face a map of smiles and sorrows. Perfect. The performance was about to begin. I was not just getting dressed. I was putting on my armor, a costume designed to lull my opponent into a false sense of security. He expected to meet a frail, lonely old woman, confused by the modern world. I would not disappoint him. My strength, I knew, was in his underestimation of me. He would see a sheep, and he would not notice the wolf hiding beneath the wool until it was far too late. The restaurant Marcus had chosen, the Sovereign Room, was one of those places where the menu is in French, and the waiters look at you as if you are personally responsible for their artistic disappointment. The air was thick with a manufactured elegance, a place where a person's worth was measured by the brand on their cufflinks and the number of zeros in their bank account. He was already seated when I arrived, looking every bit the successful young executive in a tailored shirt and silk tie. "Sylvia," he said, practically levitating from his chair, "you look absolutely radiant." "Thank you, Marcus. This place is certainly something," I replied, my eyes scanning the room. And it was something, all right. The kind of something that makes you wonder if they charge extra for the privilege of feeling inadequate. We ordered wine. He insisted on a bottle with a name longer and more complicated than my high school diploma, and then he settled into what he clearly thought would be an easy conversation. He swirled his wine like a sommelier with delusions of grandeur. "So, how are you managing? Living on your own?" he began. "Oh, brilliantly. 72 years of practice makes most things seem trivial," I answered, taking a small sip. The wine was excellent, I had to admit. Of course, but surely it must get overwhelming at times. That big house, all those decisions. It must be terribly lonely." He was fishing with all the subtlety of someone throwing dynamite into a pond. He was trying to plant the idea in my head that I was weak, that I needed help. "Robert always said I had enough opinions for 3 people, so I keep myself thoroughly entertained," I said with a light smile. He chuckled. It was a practiced boardroom laugh that probably worked wonders on investors and gullible elderly relatives. "That's wonderful. But seriously, don't you worry about practical matters? Finances, legal issues? There are so many predatory people out there who might take advantage of your generous spirit." There it was. The fish was starting to nibble at the bait. The real topic, dressed up in concern and served with expensive wine. I put my glass down and looked him straight in the eye, my gaze no longer soft and grandmotherly. "Should I be worried about something specific, Marcus?" My direct question seemed to startle him for a moment, but he recovered quickly, leaning forward conspiratorially. He lowered his voice to that confidential tone men use when they're about to explain something to a simple little woman. "Not worried, precisely," he began, "but prepared. You know how complicated things can become, especially for someone in your unique situation." "My unique situation?" I raised an eyebrow. as if being a widow is a rare medical condition. And what situation would that be, exactly? He cleared his throat, preparing for his big move. Well, living alone, making major decisions without guidance, being vulnerable to people who might not have your best interests at heart. Vulnerable to people like him, presumably. Emma and we just want to make sure you're protected. How thoughtful of you to be so concerned with my vulnerability, I said, my voice sweet, but my mind cold as ice. So, what kind of protection are we discussing? This was the moment he had been waiting for. He reached into his expensive suit jacket with the flourish of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat. But instead of a rabbit, the thing he placed on the table was far more dangerous. It was a cream-colored manila folder. He slid it across the pristine white tablecloth, and it came to a stop between our crystal wine glasses, looking innocuous and sinister all at once. Just some basic paperwork, Sylvia. Nothing dramatic, he said, his smile designed to be reassuring. Simply safeguards, in case you ever need assistance making important decisions in the future. Safeguards. He spoke the word as if he were bestowing a gift, a shield to protect me from the cruel world. But I knew this shield was designed to be a cage. I put on my reading glasses with a slow, deliberate movement and picked up the folder with the caution of someone handling a live snake. The pages were filled with dense legal jargon, but the headings danced before my eyes. Comprehensive power of attorney, power of financial oversight, medical decision-making authority. The complete and total control of a person's life, condensed into 10 pages of paper and disguised as loving concern. I know it looks complicated, Marcus interjected, his voice patient, as if explaining something to a child. But essentially, it allows me and Emma to handle things on your behalf, if needed. Paying bills, managing investments, speaking with doctors, just so you don't have to worry about the little things. I looked up from the folder, my eyes sharp behind my glasses. This is quite comprehensive. He nodded enthusiastically. My lawyer specializes in elder care. He says this is the standard structure to ensure maximum security. He's handled many cases like yours. Cases like mine. I was no longer his mother-in-law. I was a case, a problem to be managed, an asset to be controlled. How thoughtful, I said. And Emma, does she know about this initiative? Of course, he replied without a flicker of hesitation. She thinks it's a brilliant idea. Truly, Sylvia, we just want to make sure you're protected from anyone who might take advantage of your good nature. My good nature? The boy really had done his homework. He was painting a portrait of me. A lonely, trusting old woman, confused by the modern world and in need of a smart man like him to guide her. A portrait that was entirely false. And this needs to be handled quickly, I assume. He leaned forward again, his voice becoming more urgent. Exactly. Because timing is of the essence with these arrangements. The longer you wait, the more questions might arise about your capacity to make such decisions. My capacity. He was already laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent. It was a move as cruel as it was calculated. He didn't just want my money. He wanted to strip me of my mind and my agency. I smiled benignly, closing the folder and placing my hands on top of it as if blessing it. Well, this certainly requires careful consideration. Relief flooded Marcus's face, as bright and obvious as a neon sign in the night. He thought he'd won. He thought the fish was in the net. Of course, he said magnanimously, take all the time you need, although my attorney did stress that prompt action would be advisable. Prompt action. Before I had time to think or to consult with anyone who had functioning brain cells. I'll certainly want to review this with my own legal counsel, I said, The smile on Marcus's face flickered like a candle in a draft. His mask had cracked. He hadn't anticipated this. In his script, the frail old widow didn't have her own lawyer. Your own lawyer? Sylvia, my attorney is one of the best. I cut him off, my voice still sweet. Oh, I'm sure he is. But you know, at my age, my mind is a bit slow. I'd feel more comfortable having someone explain it in terms my simple mind can grasp. His confidence was wavering. He tried to regain control. Sylvia, I really think we should finalize this tonight. These matters are best handled efficiently. Efficiently. Before I realized I was being legally robbed. I gave a delicate shrug. I'm sure your notary will understand that important decisions shouldn't be rushed. He can wait. Marcus froze for a second. My notary? I looked at him with an expression of pure, wide-eyed innocence. You did bring one, didn't you? You seemed so prepared for everything else. The curtain had well and truly fallen. Marcus's mask dropped completely, revealing a brief flash of confusion and panic. He stared at me, his mind racing, trying to figure out if I was genuinely naive or actively resisting his con. Of course, he said finally, his voice a little colder now. Take all the time you need. But his eyes said something entirely different. His eyes said the game was over with the harmless old widow. Too bad for Marcus. The harmless old widow had only just begun to play. Driving home from the dinner, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. The game board was finally set. Marcus thought he was the player, and I was just a pawn. He'd made a classic mistake. He underestimated his opponent. The dinner wasn't an insult, it was a declaration of war. And if there was one thing my late husband, Robert, had taught me, it was to never back down from a fight you know you can win. He had left me an arsenal. I just never had a reason to open it. Until now. The weekend passed in a deceptive calm, but I could feel Marcus's impatience crackling through the phone lines like static before a storm. Emma called twice, her voice strained. She was caught in the middle, torn between loyalty to her new husband and love for her mother. He's just worried about you, Mom, she said on Sunday afternoon. He said he felt like you didn't trust him, and it hurt his feelings. It hurt his feelings. My heart ached for my daughter. She was being used as a pawn in this psychological war, and she didn't even know it. Marcus was using her as a weapon to inflict guilt and pressure on me. I'm sorry to put you in a difficult position, darling, I said, keeping my voice gentle. These are just big decisions and they frighten me a little. I know, but he only wants to help, she pleaded. I know, dear. I'll make a decision soon, I lied. The call ended, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. This was the hardest part, the necessary deception to protect the very person I loved most. After hanging up, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. It was time. On Monday morning, I stood at the top of my basement stairs, holding Robert's old, heavy key. My heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and dread. For 2 years I had avoided this moment, too grief-stricken to face whatever secrets my husband had left behind. Marcus Thorne had just given me an excellent reason to overcome my reluctance. I walked down the steps. The basement smelled of old paper, dust, and the faint scent of the mint aftershave Robert always wore, a ghost of a fragrance still clinging to his old clothes hanging in the corner. His workbench was exactly as he'd left it. Newspapers with half-finished crosswords, coffee-stained coasters, the reading glasses he'd worn for 40 years. I ran my hand over the worn wood, feeling a fresh pang of loss. Robert was an accountant, a man of numbers and logic. He was quiet, meticulous, and always saw the patterns beneath the chaos of life. People thought he was gentle, perhaps a little boring. They were wrong. He was a wise old wolf who quietly watched the sheep. I walked to a plain concrete wall at the far end of the basement. I tapped a few spots in a sequence I remembered from an old riddle he used to tell me. There was a soft click, and a panel I'd never noticed before, camouflaged to look like part of the wall, sprang open. Robert had always been cleverer than he let on. He loved secrets, not for malicious reasons, but because he believed the best preparation was silent preparation. Behind the panel was an old-fashioned black metal safe with a brass combination dial. I retrieved a small notebook from Robert's desk, found a sequence of numbers written in a code only I would understand, and slowly turned the dial. The heavy metal door creaked open. Inside, there was no gold or jewelry. There was something far more valuable. There was ammunition. Neatly stacked inside were thick folders. I carefully lifted them out. Bank statements for accounts in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands I'd never heard of. Investment records in hedge funds and tech startups spanning decades. Legal papers establishing trusts and protections I didn't know existed. And at the very bottom, a sealed, ivory-colored envelope with Robert's familiar handwriting on the front. For my Sylvia, only to be opened when a fox gets in the henhouse. I sat down in Robert's old chair, my hands trembling as I opened the letter. "My dearest Sylvia," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and some fox is circling our henhouse. I am sorry I never told you about the money. In total, it is $35 million, legally protected and entirely yours. I lived modestly so that we could die wealthy, and I hid our wealth so that you would be safe from predators. Predators exactly like the one who drove you to open this safe." I had to put the letter down and take a deep, shuddering breath. $35 million. The number was unreal, like something from a fantasy. I looked around the humble basement, at the modest life we had built together, and I finally understood. It was all a camouflage. The letter continued. "Do not mourn these secrets. See them as weapons. In this envelope there is a business card for a lawyer, Carol Peterson. She is the best. She has handled everything since I got sick and knows every layer of protection I've built. She has instructions to help you fight back. Do not let anyone steal what I spent 40 years building for you. Use every penny if you have to. Make them regret the day they decided to cross my wife. I always knew you were stronger than you thought you were. Now is the time to show the world." I found the business card. Carol Peterson and Associates, Trust and Estate Law. I felt a new strength surging through my veins, replacing the grief. It wasn't just the money. It was the permission. Permission to fight. Permission to be dangerous. I walked back upstairs, sat at the kitchen phone with the letter and the business card in front of me, and dialed the number. My voice, when I spoke, had no trace of a tremor. It was as solid as steel. "My name is Sylvia Beaumont. I believe my husband, Robert, made arrangements for you to assist me." The voice on the other end of the line was crisp and efficient, with no hint of surprise. "Mrs. Beaumont, I've been waiting for your call for 2 years. Can you come to my office today?" "How soon?" I asked, my voice steady. "How about right now?" There was no hesitation, no unnecessary questions, just action. This was exactly the kind of person Robert would choose. The law office of Carol Peterson and Associates was in a sleek glass and steel tower downtown. It was nothing like the dusty, book-lined chambers I had imagined. This place was bright, minimalist, with modern art on the walls and a panoramic view of the city. It radiated power and efficiency. I had expected a stuffy, wood-paneled room and an older woman with horn-rimmed glasses. Instead, I was greeted by an open space filled with light, and a woman who was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and a handshake that could crack walnuts. Carol Peterson wore a perfectly tailored suit, her hair cut in a stylish, no-nonsense bob. She exuded an energy of pure confidence and control. "Mrs. Beaumont, please come in," she said, leading me into her office. "I'm Carol. Robert told me a great deal about you." "I hope they were good things," I said, sinking into a soft leather chair. Carol offered a small smile, one that didn't hide the sharp intelligence behind it. "He said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known, even if you didn't realize it yourself. He said this day might come." "What day?" "The day someone tried to manipulate you into signing away your rights," she said. "Specifically, a new son-in-law." I was stunned. Robert's foresight was even more precise than I could have imagined. This wasn't just a general contingency plan. It was a strategy designed specifically for the threat of Marcus Thorne. Carol spread documents across her wide glass desk. They looked like the ones from my safe, but here, under the bright office lights and in her capable hands, they seemed to come alive with power. "Your husband was remarkably prescient," she said. "He predicted someone would approach you within 2 years of his death, likely through a family connection, trying to gain control of what they assumed were modest assets." "But they aren't modest," I stated. Carol looked me directly in the eye, her voice firm. "No, they are not. $35 million, completely protected in an irrevocable trust. To put it simply, Mrs. Beaumont, it's a financial fortress. You are the queen inside those walls. You control everything. You can direct the investments, withdraw funds, do anything you wish. But no one else can get in. The gates only open on your command." The weight of the past 2 years felt like it was lifting from my shoulders. Even if they somehow obtained power of attorney? Even if I had signed Marcus's papers? Carol shook her head. "Even then, Robert specifically designed this structure to protect you from that exact kind of manipulation. Any power of attorney signed under duress or deception would be voided against the trust. It's predator-proof." I leaned back, feeling as if I were seeing my life clearly for the first time in 2 years. I wasn't a potential victim. I was the master of a fortress. The grief over Robert's passing was now intertwined with a profound gratitude for his wisdom and his fierce, protective love. "So, Marcus can't touch a penny." "Marcus can't touch a penny," Carol confirmed. "But that's just the defensive part, Mrs. Beaumont. Robert didn't just leave you with a shield." Carol smiled, and this time there was an almost predatory glint in her eye. "He also left you a sword, and we now have the resources to make sure he never tries this again, with you or with anyone else." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She leaned forward, her voice humming with energy. "I mean, we aren't just going to block him. We are going to utterly dismantle him, legally and financially. We are going to make him regret he ever learned your name. We are going to make him a cautionary tale that other predators will tell each other for years to come." A cold thrill of adrenaline went down my spine. This was no longer self-defense. This was a counterattack. "How?" Carol began ticking points off on her fingers. 1. criminal charges for attempted fraud. 2. Civil suits for emotional distress and legal fees. And 3. The most interesting part, we are going to launch a full forensic investigation into every financial transaction he's made for the past 5 years. Is that legal? Carol laughed. Perfectly. When someone attempts to defraud you, it opens the door for intense scrutiny into their life. We'll find out where his money came from, where it went, and who else he owes. We are going to expose his entire operation. Operation? You think there are others involved? Oh, absolutely, she said. Men like Marcus don't work alone. There's usually a whole network: shady lawyers, complicit bank employees, creative accountants. We're going to find them all. A painful thought surfaced. What about my daughter's marriage? Carol's tone softened slightly. That will be up to Emma, but she will make that decision with full information instead of lies and manipulation. And this money remains a secret until you decide otherwise. The beauty of Robert's plan is that you can continue living exactly as you have been. Or you can buy a yacht tomorrow. Your choice. I gathered the trust documents, feeling like I was holding lightning in my hands. I was no longer just Sylvia Beaumont, the widow. I was a force, a general preparing for battle. I looked directly into Carol's eyes. When do we start? Carol smiled, a confident, knowing smile. We already have. The moment you walked into my office, Marcus Thorne went from being the hunter to being the prey. Leaving Carol's office, I no longer felt like a widow seeking help. I felt like a general surveying her armory before a decisive battle. Robert had given me a sword, and Carol Peterson was the one who had sharpened it. Now, it was time to use it. Good news, Sylvia, Carol said over the phone the next morning. I just spoke with an old friend at the district attorney's office. I've found a prosecutor who specializes in elder fraud. She's very interested in Marcus's case. Why? I asked. Because she thinks he isn't a lone wolf, Carol explained. She believes he's part of a larger network. If we can prove that, we don't just take down one con man, we could dismantle an entire organization. Her name is Sarah Chen. The DA's office was imposing, filled with stacks of files and law books. Sarah Chen, a sharp prosecutor in her 40s, shook my hand and Carol's. She had eyes that seemed to see right through you, as if she had already witnessed every lie humanity could invent. Mrs. Beaumont, thank you for coming in, she said. What you're doing takes a great deal of courage. Most victims are too afraid or ashamed to speak up. I'm past shame, Ms. Chen, I replied. Now, I'm just angry. Sarah Chen nodded in approval. Anger is a good motivator. Tell me about your son-in-law's approach. I calmly and precisely recounted every conversation, every manipulation, every carefully crafted lie Marcus had fed me. Carol occasionally interjected with legal details, forming a complete picture of his predatory behavior. Classic pattern, Sarah said after listening, still taking meticulous notes. Family connection, creating financial pressure, an urgency to sign documents. He's done this before. The language he uses, the steps he takes. It's too professional. Amateurs make mistakes. Marcus doesn't. So what do we do? I asked. Sarah Chen leaned back, steepling her fingers. We don't just react to his actions. We create a stage, and he will be the star of his own downfall. We're going to set a trap. The plan was audacious and simple. I was to call Marcus and tell him he was right, that I was scared and needed his protection. I would agree to sign the papers. They would record and film everything. That weekend was surreal. On one hand, I had to maintain a veneer of normalcy. On the other, my quiet suburban home was being discreetly turned into the set for a sting operation. Unmarked vans came and went. Plainclothes technicians quietly installed microscopic cameras and microphones in my living room. On Saturday evening, I stood before a mirror, rehearsing for the performance of a lifetime. I practiced a wavering, grateful widow's voice. I ran through lines about feeling safer under Marcus's protection. I was a retired librarian who had spent her life reading books, understanding characters. Now, I had to become one, a character who was weak, frightened, and utterly convinced. It was the hardest role I'd ever played, because inside, a fire of rage and resolve was burning hotter than ever. The phone rang Sunday morning. It was Emma. "Mom," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Marcus is very upset. He says you don't trust him, and that it's hurting his feelings." My heart ached. I was in the process of destroying my daughter's marriage to save myself, and she was completely unaware. I had made the difficult decision not to bring her into this until it was over. Knowing beforehand would only place her in an unbearable position. "I'm sorry to make things difficult for you, darling," I said, my voice deliberately soft. "It's just that big decisions like this are a little scary for me." "I know, but he only wants to help," she pleaded. "I know, sweetie. I'll make a decision soon," I lied. The call ended, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. This was the hardest part, the necessary deception to protect the person I loved most in the world. On Monday morning, I sat by the phone in my kitchen. Carol was with me, a silent, steadying presence. In the upstairs bedroom, Sarah Chen's team was monitoring the equipment. I took a deep breath and dialed Marcus's number. "Marcus, it's Sylvia," I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound weary and anxious. His voice on the other end tried and failed to hide its excitement. "Sylvia, I'm so glad you called." I've been thinking about our conversation," I said, letting a convincing tremor enter my voice. "I think you were right. I do need protection. This weekend made me realize how truly vulnerable I am. I'd like to move forward with those papers." The relief in his voice was a tangible thing, a wave of triumph washing through the phone line. The fish had taken the bait, swallowing the hook, line, and sinker. "That's wonderful news, Sylvia," he said. "I knew you'd make the right choice. When would be convenient for you?" "As soon as possible," I whispered. "I feel very unsettled." "Perfect. I can have everything ready by this afternoon. I'll bring my notary. We'll get everything signed, and you'll be completely protected." "Protected from him?" "If you think that's best," I said. "Shall we say 3 o'clock?" 3 o'clock sounds perfect. I'll see you then, Sylvia." I hung up the phone. Carol walked into the room and gave me a single, approving nod. The trap was set. The mouse had seen the cheese and was scurrying right toward it. After the phone call, an eerie silence fell over the house. It wasn't the usual peaceful quiet I was accustomed to, but the charged stillness of a stage moments before the curtain rises, the hush of the forest just before the predator strikes. I knew I wasn't alone. Upstairs in the guest bedroom, Sarah Chen's team was watching monitors, listening through the hidden microphones. A few plainclothes officers were sitting in an unmarked car parked down the street. My home, my fortress, had become the epicenter of a carefully orchestrated operation. I was both the bait and the hunter. I spent the next few hours preparing. I brewed a pot of chamomile tea to give my hands something to do. I placed a stack of old magazines on the coffee table next to a half-finished knitting basket, all props for my role as a gentle, harmless widow. With every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the sound seemed to grow louder, counting down to the decisive moment. I wasn't afraid. Strangely, I felt a cold, crystalline calm. This had to be done. For Robert, for Emma, and for myself. At precisely 3 p.m., the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath, centered myself in my character, and went to the door. Marcus stood on the porch with his leather briefcase, and beside him was a nervous-looking woman in a business suit, who I assumed was the notary. Marcus flashed his most trustworthy smile, a brilliant, dazzling thing that could sell snow to an Eskimo. "Sylvia," he said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "Thank you for seeing us." "Come in," I replied, my voice holding the slight, practiced tremor I had rehearsed. They stepped into my living room. Marcus placed his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a decisive click. He laid the documents out in a neat row, like a general arranging his troops for a battle he was certain to win. "Sylvia, I can't tell you how relieved I am that you're taking this step," he said, sitting across from me. "I know it's a big decision, but it's the right one." "I just realized you were right about the dangers out there," I replied, looking down at my hands, which I had clasped in my lap. "An old woman like me needs guidance." "Exactly," he said, a self-satisfied glint in his eye. "Now, these papers will give me and Emma the authority to protect your interests. All of your interests." "All of them?" I asked, feigning confusion. "All of them," he confirmed. "Financial decisions, medical choices, living arrangements, everything. So you can live your life without having to worry about a thing." Living arrangements. He was already planning to put me away somewhere convenient, a nursing home where I'd no longer be an obstacle. I picked up the pen, intentionally letting my hand shake. "This is all quite overwhelming." "I know it seems complicated," he said in a soothing tone. "But trust me, this is for the best for everyone. Trust him. The man who was stealing my life while promising to protect it." I signed my name at the bottom of the first page, my penmanship deliberately shaky. Then I paused. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Of course," he said, clearly thinking I was just looking for a final bit of reassurance. "What happens to my money after I sign this?" "Your money will be professionally managed. No more worrying about investments or bills or financial decisions." "By whom?" "By people with experience," he replied. "People who understand these things. People like you." "Yes," he said, "people like me and Emma." I signed the second page. "And if I change my mind later?" "Well," he said, his smile fading slightly, "that would depend on your mental state at the time. These arrangements are designed to be permanent." Permanent, like a life sentence. I understood. I signed the third page. "Marcus," I said, putting the pen down before I signed the final, most critical page, "there's something I should mention." He raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I think there might be more money than you realize." His eyes lit up like a Christmas morning. A flash of uncontrollable greed. "More money?" "Robert may have had some accounts I didn't know about," I said, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Hidden investments, perhaps." Marcus's hands were actually trembling now. "How much more, Sylvia?" There it was, the greed, the desperation, the absolute confirmation that this was never about protecting me. "Well," I said, my tone suddenly changing, becoming clear and steady. "That's where things get interesting." He blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "What do you mean?" I smiled, a cold, mirthless smile, thinking of the $35 million and the trap we had just sprung. I mean, you're under arrest, Marcus. As the words left my mouth, the front and back doors burst open. Plainclothes officers swarmed in from every direction. Sarah Chen stepped in from the kitchen, her expression grim. Marcus whipped his head around, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and then pure, unadulterated terror. You can't, he stammered, staring at me. I can, I replied. I did. And now you're going to learn what happens to predators who hunt the wrong prey. As they cuffed him, I heard him screaming about entrapment and legal challenges. The notary was sobbing hysterically. But all I could hear was the sound of justice being served, with a $35 million side of revenge. After the police and the DA's team left, my house fell silent once more. But this time, it was the silence of a battlefield after the fight is over. The scent of cold chamomile tea hung in the air, mingled with the lingering smell of adrenaline. I sank into my favorite armchair, looking at the power of attorney documents lying askew on the coffee table. They were no longer a threat, just pieces of paper, exhibits in a criminal case. I felt a profound sense of relief, but also a deep sorrow for the storm that was about to break over my daughter's head. And that storm did not take long to arrive. The story led the 6 o'clock evening news. Local businessman Marcus Thorne arrested in elder fraud sting operation. The image of Marcus, his face a mask of disbelief and rage as he was led from my house in handcuffs, was broadcast on every channel. My phone rang almost immediately. It was Emma. Mom! Her voice was a hysterical, broken sob through the phone. What have you done? I protected myself, Emma, I replied, my voice calm but firm. I protected myself from your husband's attempt to steal my independence and my assets. But the arrest! The charges, this will destroy him, she cried. Good, I said, the coldness in my own voice surprising me. That was the point. How can you be so cold? How can you defend a man who systematically planned to rob your own mother? I countered. There was silence on the other end of the line. Come over, Emma. It's time you saw the truth. An hour later, Emma was at my door, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked as fragile as a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. I led her into the living room, the very room where, just hours before, her marriage had effectively been blown apart. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply sat her down beside me and pressed play on the small digital recorder the DA's team had left for me. Marcus's voice filled the room, the smooth, charming voice Emma loved, now talking about gaining control over all of my interests, about making my medical decisions and living arrangements, about how these agreements were permanent and dependent on my mental state. Then came the climax, my voice mentioning the possibility of more money than he realized, and then Marcus's voice, laced with a trembling, raw greed. How much more, Sylvia? I watched Emma's face drain of all color. The denial in her eyes began to crack, giving way to horror as she heard the true nature of the man she had married. She heard the naked avarice, the calculated manipulation, the utter disrespect for me, her mother. The recording ended. Emma sat frozen, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. He was going to put me in a home, sweetheart, I said softly. He was going to take everything your father left for me and convince everyone I was too senile to object. But he loves me, she whispered, a final, weak protest. He loves what he thought you could get him. There's a difference, I replied. I then handed her another file, one Carol had prepared. Inside was the proof of Marcus's gambling debts, the fake business ventures he'd used to borrow money, and, most painfully, the initial findings on two other wealthy widows he had helped, financially, before he ever met Emma. "This wasn't his first time, Emma," I said. "You married a professional predator." She stared at the evidence, her face cycling through denial, anger, and finally, utter heartbreak. Her happy little snow globe of a life had just been shattered against a concrete wall. The next assault came the following morning. Patricia Thorne, Marcus's mother, arrived unannounced, looking like a deposed queen, her arrogance poorly disguised by a mask of dignity. "Sylvia," she said, as I opened the door, her voice dripping with accusation. "You have destroyed my son's life over a misunderstanding." "I have exposed your son's criminal behavior, Patricia," I answered, not giving an inch. "There's a difference." "He was trying to help you," she insisted, her voice rising. "He was trying to rob me. The recordings don't lie." "This is vindictive and cruel," she hissed, her elegant facade finally crumbling. "This is justice," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "Your son chose to prey on elderly women. Now he gets to experience the consequences. I think you should leave." She stared at me for a long moment, perhaps realizing that the wall of steel before her was immovable. She turned on her heel and stormed off, her dignity in tatters. The storm had made landfall, and I was still standing. But the war was just beginning. The week after the arrest was a blur of legal procedures and emotional upheaval. Emma stayed with me temporarily, a quiet and withdrawn presence in the house, as she tried to piece together the fragments of a life she once believed was perfect. We didn't talk much, but her presence, the familiar sound of her footsteps on the floorboards, was a silent comfort to us both. Wednesday was Marcus's bail hearing. I went to the courthouse with Carol, not as a trembling victim, but as a quiet witness to the beginning of justice. Marcus entered the courtroom in an orange prison jumpsuit, his polished veneer stripped away to reveal a tired and bitter man. His slick lawyer did his best to paint a picture of a concerned son-in-law entrapped by a paranoid and vindictive mother-in-law. "Your Honor," the lawyer argued, "this is a simple family misunderstanding that has been blown completely out of proportion." Prosecutor Sarah Chen stood, her expression unreadable. "Your Honor, this was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attempt to defraud a senior citizen of her assets. We have audio evidence of the defendant admitting his intent to control the victim's finances, medical care, and living arrangements. We also have evidence that the defendant is heavily in debt, which establishes a clear motive." The judge, an older woman with no-nonsense eyes, stared down at Marcus. "Mr. Thorne, the evidence presented suggests a systematic, predatory scheme. Your claims of concern seem inconsistent with your desire to gain permanent control of your mother-in-law's assets." She banged her gavel. "Bail is set at $1 million. A gasp went through the courtroom. $1 million. It was a sum that Marcus, with his gambling debts, could never hope to produce. He would remain in jail until his trial. As they led him away, he looked at me, and in that moment, I saw no remorse, only pure, undiluted hatred. He wasn't angry for what he had done. He was angry that he'd been caught. A few days later, Carol came to my house with news that was even more shocking. "The FBI is interested in Marcus's case," she said, as we sat in my kitchen, steam rising from our teacups. I raised an eyebrow. "The FBI? This hardly seems to have crossed state lines." "We're not so sure about that," Carol replied. They've been monitoring certain activities for months. They don't think Marcus is just a solo act. They believe he's a player in a multi-state elder fraud ring. How big? Potentially dozens of victims, millions in stolen assets. Your case, Sylvia, with its clean audio evidence and your willingness to testify, could be the key that blows the whole organization wide open. If they can get Marcus to cooperate, he might give up the ringleaders. Will he cooperate? Carol shrugged. Depends on the prison time he's facing. 20 years in a federal penitentiary tends to make people very talkative. He'll have to choose between loyalty to other criminals and trying to salvage what's left of his future. 20 years. Marcus would be a middle-aged man when he got out, with a criminal record that would follow him forever. That evening, Emma and I were sitting on the back porch. She had been quiet for most of the day. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes clear and resolute, a stark change from the brokenness of a few days prior. "I filed for divorce," she said simply. I placed my hand on hers. "Are you sure, sweetheart?" "I can't be married to someone who tried to rob my mother," she replied. "I was in love with a fantasy mom, a character he created. Now that the curtain has been pulled back, I can't pretend I don't see the monster behind it." "What about the house, the cars, the lifestyle he provided?" Emma shook her head. "All bought with borrowed money and false promises. I don't want anything that came from his schemes." In that moment, I was filled with an immense sense of pride for my daughter. She had lost a husband, but she had found herself. A few weeks later, Emma moved into a small apartment near my house. The experience had changed her, made her stronger, more wary, more aware of how people could be manipulated. "I feel so stupid," she said one evening as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset. "You trusted someone you loved," I said. "That isn't stupid. It's human." But all the signs were there. The expensive lifestyle, the vague answers about money, his sudden interest in you after we got engaged. "He was very good at what he did," I comforted her. "Professional manipulators are trained to exploit trust." She looked at me. "How did you know?" "I didn't, at first," I admitted. "But your father, he left me resources, tools to fight back when someone tried to steal what he'd built." "What kind of resources?" I looked at my daughter, wondering if she was ready for the truth of Robert's legacy. "The kind," I said, "that turn helpless widows into very dangerous enemies." The conversation I had with Emma that evening on the porch was the first time I revealed the true extent of the fortress Robert had built around me. I didn't tell her the exact number. The world didn't need to know that yet, and she wasn't ready for it. But I showed her the letter from her father. I wanted her to understand that my fight wasn't born from bitterness, but from a legacy of love and protection. As she read her father's words, Emma wept, not from grief, but from understanding. She finally saw the quiet wisdom of the man she had always thought was so simple. Marcus's trial began in September. The courtroom was imposing, but to me, it felt like a theater where Marcus's final act was about to be performed. His legal team tried every defense imaginable: a family misunderstanding, a case of entrapment, even hinting that my mind might not be as sharp as it once was. It was all useless. The evidence was undeniable. The recordings were the fatal blow. When Marcus's greedy voice echoed through the courtroom, asking, "How much more money?" I saw a few jurors physically shake their heads. Even his own lawyer looked disgusted. Every lie, every manipulation was laid bare under the cold, impartial light of justice. When I was called to testify, I did not speak as a victim. I spoke as a survivor. I recounted the story calmly and clearly, from the slight at the wedding to the deceitful words at the restaurant. I looked directly at Marcus as I spoke, but he refused to meet my gaze. The jury deliberated for just 47 minutes. When they returned, their faces held no doubt. Guilty on all counts. On the day of the sentencing, the judge who had set Marcus's bail looked down at him with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice echoing in the silent courtroom, "you have systematically targeted the vulnerable, exploiting trust and family relationships to destroy their independence and steal their life savings. You have shown no remorse for the lives you have ruined. Your crime is not merely theft. It is a theft of the soul." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This court sentences you to 20 years in a federal penitentiary." 20 years. Marcus would be nearly 60 when he was released. His entire future had evaporated. As they cuffed him and led him away, he finally looked at me, his eyes burning with pure hatred. "This isn't over, old woman," he hissed. I smiled sweetly. "Oh, yes," I thought to myself. "It is." After the trial, Carol and I had a celebratory dinner at the Sovereign Room, the very restaurant where Marcus had first tried to manipulate me. This time, I didn't sit there as a target being probed. I sat there as a victor. "Do you realize you've become something of a legend in elder law circles?" Carol said, raising her wine glass. "You're the widow who fought back and won. You've inspired other victims to come forward, other families to question suspicious relatives." "Good," I said. "No one should have to suffer what Marcus planned for me." "So what's next for you, Sylvia?" Carol asked. "A yacht? A trip around the world? You've earned it." I thought of Emma, rebuilding her life with hard-won wisdom. I thought of the other victims Marcus had destroyed over the years. I thought of Robert's trust and the power it gave me, not just to defend myself, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. What's next? I looked out the window at the city lights. Next, I make sure this never happens to anyone else. Carol raised an eyebrow. How? By using every resource at my disposal to hunt down predators like Marcus before they find their next victim, I said. We've been playing defense. It's time to go on the attack. Carol smiled. That sounds expensive. I can afford it, I replied. That night, I sat in my kitchen, rereading Robert's letter one last time. He had known this day might come. He had prepared me for it. He had given me the weapons to win a war I didn't even know was being fought. But more than that, he had given me permission to be dangerous. Marcus Thorne had learned too late that some widows bite back. The war against him was over. But my new war was just beginning. Sylvia proved that true strength isn't about age or appearance. It's about an unbreakable will to never surrender. If you were inspired by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to spread the message. And remember, if you have a story of your own, send it to us. We'll see you in the next video.